Today we're installing the frame in position and laying out the decking boards. If you haven't already checked out part 1, click here or have a look in the description below. I start by notching out the concrete so the frame is level. This section had lifted over the years, so it had to be cut out. This worked pretty much the same way as how you'd cut a rabbit, by making multiple slices, then knocking them out, although it was a lot messier and required a bit more force. That was all I managed that afternoon, but the frame was now sitting level and ready to be mounted. The next morning I worked on the fascia boards. To start, I had to remove a strip of the lawn where the fascia could slip into. The long side had already been cut to length, but I still needed a mitered edge and a small notch to sit on top of the driveway. I cut the notch out with the handsaw. The short side then had to be cut and notched too. This notch was a bit bigger, so I needed to cut it out in sections. I then ripped it down from 120mm wide to 90mm wide. This compensated for the deck falling away from the house. Now that both fascias are cut, I attach the long side. I attach the fascia from the back with Tech screws, but because it's getting attached from the back, I didn't go light on the screws. I ended up putting in 12 in total, so I reckon that'll hold pretty well now. Both fascias received 2 coats of paint on the miters, notches, and the long rip. The original treatment doesn't go the whole way through the wood, so this will make it last a lot longer. I used window packers as shims because they're plastic, so they won't degrade and they won't compress. This pack had different sizes, so I could create different heights. One final check. Then I started adding the packers. To keep them in line, I used some exterior silicone, the type of stuff you'd use on gutters. I forced that into the gaps in between the packers to make sure they didn't move. The final locking piece was to add 10 L brackets to the assembly. I drilled an extra hole in each to account for the height of the frame. I drove 2 Tech screws in each bracket. Some of the brackets weren't at the same angle as the frame, but some gentle persuasion fixed that pretty quick. And to secure it to the floor, I put a diner bolt into the concrete. I can safely say now that this deck is going nowhere. Now I could attach the other fascia board. That got the same treatment as the first, with 6 Tech screws going in. The next day it all came together. It was time to start decking. Before cutting the boards, I first measured the shortest side. It was about 5mm shorter than the other side. All the boards would be cut to this length. I then set up a jig on my miter saw using a straight edge and some clamps. I tested the cut, then started cutting all 32 boards. The process went like this. Grab a board from the pile, square one edge off, send it over to the stop on the jig, and then cut the other end. Something particular I did with the first cut was to undercut it slightly by angling the board upwards on the miter saw. This reduces the amount of moisture the end grain is exposed to because it's facing downwards. As I went through the cuts, I laid the boards out from one end to the other. Then at the end I could check that I was happy with the layout and move some around if necessary. So just to add a little something extra to the deck before it goes down, what I've done is written a letter to the next person who, eventually will pull the deck up. So I'm going to take this, fold that up in a plastic bag, and that'll go under the deck for the person who pulls it up. I then made a jig for drilling holes at the end of each board. The decking would be nailed down, so to avoid splitting at the edges, I pre-drilled them. For the rest of the board, it didn't bother me because it's soft pine, but the last thing I wanted at this stage was a split board. You'll notice one nail went in 90 degrees and the second hole was at an angle. This improves the fastening of the boards because they essentially have to move in two different directions to pull the nails out. The industry standard way of spacing boards is to use nails, but I had these tile spacers left over from when I put pavers on the front porch. I used 3mm gaps lengthways and 1.5mm gaps where the tip of the deck met the fascia board. On the first board, I clamped it to the fascia to make sure that from the start the boards were parallel. This meant there was less chance of errors later down the line. Then I started nailing the boards down. This took me ages to do. There was a lot of nails to get through. There were also 65mm nails instead of the usual 50mm. But I'm pretty happy now because those boards are never coming up. I continually measure as I'm laying the boards out and reduce the gap slightly to make sure the last deck board was around 70mm wide. This made it only slightly smaller, so it was still a substantial piece. If I'd ended up with a 20mm gap, it wouldn't have worked out so well. So I ripped that board down from 90mm to 70mm. And after checking that the fit was okay, I nailed that one in too. The next 3 days rained on and off, but eventually it cleared up long enough for me to start painting. The first job was to clean the deck to get as much of the dirt off as possible and remove all the lawn touching the fascia board. After that, I folded up some newspaper to slide into the gaps between the decking and the wall. All the corners and concrete, they also got taped up. Now, I used a water-based oil, and I still don't really understand how that makes sense. I put the first coat on very liberally to ensure all the end grain got covered. I found that the last stroke had to be long and gentle in order to create a smooth and consistent finish. Here's a picture of the deck after the first coat. I wasn't happy with how orange it had come out, so I got a small tin of a more purple red color and mixed that in. Now here's a picture of the third and final coat, and you can see the change in the color. All in all, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. If you have any questions or comments, let me know below. And if you like what you see, hit that thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe for more upcoming videos.